The backyard barbecue hummed with laughter about corporate projects under festive string lights. As the last guest drove off, she leaned in close. "Don't tell Dad," my stepmother whispered, seconds before the garage door slammed shut and the first blow landed. The next morning, I walked into the Hawthorne and Vale offices as if nothing had happened. After all, my abuser is also the company's CFO, and my revenge wouldn't be bloody. It would be a presentation for the entire board to see. My name is Avery Vale. At 29, I am a risk analyst for Hawthorne and Vale, the logistics firm my father founded on the salt-bitten coast of Maine, our home. A sprawling cedar and glass structure on the edge of a lake in Northbrook was supposed to be a sanctuary. Tonight, it was a stage. The air, thick with the scent of grilled steak and burning pine logs from the fire pit, carried the easy laughter of my father's business associates. String lights drooped between two ancient maple trees, casting a warm, deceptive glow on the manicured lawn. From the deck, I watched the performance. At the center of it all was Camille Hawthorne, my stepmother and the company's chief financial officer. She moved with a liquid grace, a crystal glass of Chardonnay perfectly angled in her hand, her smile a calibrated instrument of warmth and welcome. To the shipping magnates and their wives, she was the epitome of effortless charm, the brilliant mind who had helped Graham Vale triple his company's valuation. They saw the impeccable cream linen dress, the sun-kissed blonde hair swept into an elegant chignon, the way she touched my father's arm with a possessive affection that looked like devotion. I saw the quiet tightening of her jaw when a conversation veered off script. I saw the flick of her eyes toward me every few minutes, a silent, constant audit. She was perfect. She was a predator. The tension started in the kitchen an hour before the last guest left. I was refilling a tray of appetizers when she cornered me by the industrial-sized refrigerator. My mistake had been leaving a document on the granite countertop, a single printed-out email I'd been reviewing. Her eyes, the color of a winter sky, locked onto it. "What are you carrying, Avery?" she asked, her voice a low murmur that didn't carry past the hum of the ice maker. Before I could answer, her fingers wrapped around my wrist. It wasn't a casual touch. It was a vice. Her nails, perfectly manicured in a neutral shade, dug into my skin. The pressure was sharp, precise, a message meant only for me. "It's nothing," I said, my voice tighter than I intended. "Just a risk summary for the quarterly report." Her grip tightened. "I didn't ask for a new summary." She leaned closer, her expensive perfume filling my senses, a cloying floral scent that I would forever associate with fear. She released my wrist as abruptly as she had grabbed it, picking up the paper. Her eyes scanned the contents, a chain of correspondence questioning the classification of a significant contractual loss contingency fund. My name was in the sender field. Her smile never wavered, but the warmth vanished from her eyes, leaving behind something cold and hard as glacial ice. "We'll discuss this later," she said, folding the paper into a neat square and tucking it into the pocket of her dress. She turned back to the party without another word, her posture flawless. I stood there for a moment, rubbing the angry red marks on my wrist, my heart hammering against my ribs. The party wound down slowly. The last pair of headlights vanished down our long, pine-lined driveway, and an immediate silence fell over the property, broken only by the chirping of crickets and the distant lapping of lake water against the shore. My father, Graham Vale, was at the fire pit, talking on his phone, his back to the house. The moment was perfect. Camille didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. She walked up behind me on the deck, her soft-soled espadrilles making no sound on the wood. "Come with me," she said. It wasn't a request. I followed her, a cold dread coiling in my stomach. She led me not back into the house, but toward the attached 3-car garage. The side door clicked open into the cavernous, dimly lit space. It smelled of gasoline, cedar chips, and old rubber. She flicked on a single fluorescent bulb, which flickered twice before casting a sterile, buzzing light over the concrete floor. She turned to face me, her expression unreadable. She walked to the main garage door and pressed the button, and the heavy door rumbled down its tracks, sealing us inside with a definitive thud. The world outside was gone. She approached me, her movements slow and deliberate. She stopped just a foot away, close enough for me to see the fine lines around her eyes that her makeup usually concealed. "Don't tell Dad about the contingency fund," she whispered, her voice a venomous hiss. "You don't understand the big picture. You're just a girl playing with spreadsheets." Before I could form a response, her hand shot out. It wasn't her open palm. It was a thick, glossy magazine, probably a Forbes or Fortune, rolled into a tight, hard cylinder. The first blow caught me on the side of my head, just above my ear. The sound was a sickening thwack, and the force of it sent a shockwave through my skull. Stars exploded behind my eyes. I staggered back, disoriented, my ear ringing with a high-pitched whine that drowned out the hum of the oversized freezer against the far wall. "You think you're so clever," she seethed, her face contorted into a mask of pure rage. "Going behind my back, questioning my financials." The second blow came before I could recover, striking my shoulder and sending a jolt of sharp pain down my arm. Then came the slap. This time, it was her open hand, a brutal, cracking sound that echoed in the enclosed space. My head snapped to the side, and the metallic taste of blood filled my mouth. I stumbled backward, my feet tangling, and fell against a wooden workbench. My hip crashed into a metal stool, which skittered away with a screech. My hand flailed out to catch my balance and slammed into a heavy toolbox, sending a wrench clattering to the floor. I lay there for a second, breathless, the cold concrete seeping through my jeans. The world was a blur of pain and ringing silence, punctuated by the steady, indifferent hum of the freezer. I pushed myself up, my body screaming in protest. I touched my lip and my fingers came away wet and dark in the stark light. Camille stood over me, her breathing slightly heavy, the rolled-up magazine still clutched in her hand. She watched me for a long moment, her chest rising and falling. Then, as if a switch had been flipped, the fury drained from her face. She smoothed her dress, took a deep breath, and her mask of serene control slid back into place. She walked over to a storage cabinet and pulled out a first aid kit. She opened it, took out a small antiseptic wipe and a single Band-Aid. She held it out to me. Her voice was calm, almost gentle. "A little accident," she said, a faint, chilling smile playing on her lips. "You're so clumsy sometimes." My mind was a maelstrom, but my body went on autopilot. I took the wipe and the bandage, my hand shaking. I didn't speak. I couldn't. But as I sat there on the cold floor under her watchful gaze, something inside me shifted. The fear was still there, a cold, hard knot in my gut. But something else was crystallizing around it, a cold, clear focus. My eyes darted around the garage, not in panic, but in assessment. I noted the small, black dome of the security camera mounted high in the corner, its little red light glowing faintly. I traced its line of sight, mapping out its field of vision, and I noted the blind spot, the small area behind the hulking form of my father's vintage Porsche, the very spot where I was now sitting, where the worst of it had happened. I cataloged everything: the fallen wrench, the overturned stool, the smear of my blood on the concrete floor. I nodded mutely, accepting her narrative. It was the only move I had. I pressed the wipe to my split lip, the sting a sharp, grounding reality. I was alive, I was hurt, and I had a starting point. The main garage door rumbled open again, flooding the space with the soft evening light from the backyard. My father stood there, silhouetted against the glowing string lights, his phone now back in his pocket. "Everything okay in here?" he asked, his voice laced with a faint, cheerful curiosity. "I heard a crash." Camille was by his side in an instant, her hand on his arm, her expression a perfect portrait of mild concern. "It was nothing, darling," she said, her voice as smooth as silk. "Avery just got herself caught on the garage door coming down, tripped over a toolbox. You know how she gets lost in her own world." She turned and gave me a look that was both a warning and a dare. My father looked from her to me. His brow furrowed for a half-second. He saw me on the floor, the first aid kit open beside me. "Are you all right, Ave?" I forced my legs to work, pushing myself to my feet. My body ached with a dull, throbbing pain. "I'm fine, Dad," I managed to say, my voice hoarse. "Just clumsy." He accepted it without question. He always did. He trusted his wife. He loved her. He saw her as his partner, his savior. He didn't see the predator standing beside him. As they walked back into the house, their arms linked, I lingered in the garage. I walked over to the polished side of the black Porsche, in the distorted reflection of the driver's side door. I saw a stranger. Her face was pale. Her eye was already starting to swell, and a stark white Band-Aid was stuck awkwardly to her swollen lip. But her eyes were not the eyes of a victim. They were clear, they were cold, and they were focused. I could still taste the blood in my mouth. It tasted like a promise. My silence had been bought with violence, but I knew, in that moment, that I would make them pay for it, not in kind, but in the one currency they truly understood: the cold, hard, irrefutable truth. And it would all start with a file on my computer, a folder I would name Recipes. The Vale Tower in Brackenport was a monument to my father's ambition, a 20-story shard of glass and steel that pierced the often gray Maine sky. Its lobby was a cathedral of corporate sterility, all polished marble and silent. Automatic doors that whispered open as you approached. The air smelled of expensive, lemon-scented cleaning fluid and the faint, aerosol perfume of the receptionist, a woman whose smile was as bright and unyielding as the laminated visitor badges she handed out. The morning after the barbecue, I walked through those doors with a layer of concealer skillfully blended over the burgeoning purple bruise on my cheekbone and a throbbing ache in my ribs that no amount of makeup could hide. I was a walking, breathing risk assessment, a liability hidden in plain sight. My office on the 12th floor was part of an open-plan landscape, a sea of ergonomic chairs and dual monitors. My domain was data. I lived in spreadsheets, in P&L statements, in the quiet, absolute language of numbers. While the rest of Hawthorne and Vale moved containers and managed fleets, my job was to find the cracks in the foundation before they became chasms. For the past 2 weeks, a hairline fracture had caught my attention, a line item that Camille had nonchalantly introduced 2 quarters ago. Contractual loss contingency. It was a standard, if vaguely named, accounting provision meant to set aside funds for anticipated losses from specific contracts. In theory, it was prudent financial management. In practice, it was a ghost. With the taste of blood still a metallic memory in my mouth, I dove into the numbers with a new, vicious clarity. I pulled the balance sheets for the last 6 quarters. The pattern wasn't just suspicious. It was clockwork. In the final month of each fiscal quarter, just before the earnings reports were due to be finalized for the board and key investors, the contingency fund would swell, sometimes by millions. The corresponding debit was a complex, tangled web of operational expenses that effectively lowered the company's stated net income. Then, in the first month of the following quarter, the fund would be depleted through a series of reconciliations, quietly boosting the available cash flow. It was a sophisticated shell game, designed to smooth out earnings, to manage expectations, to paint a picture of steady, predictable growth when the reality of the logistics industry was anything but. It was fraud, elegantly executed. And at the heart of it was a single recurring vendor name, Bluefinch Freight. They were the primary recipient of these contingency payouts. Yet, when I ran a search on our own supplier database, Bluefinch was a phantom. They were incorporated just 8 months ago. They had no physical address listed, only a PEO box in Delaware. They had no other contracts with us, no freight records, no history. They existed only on paper, a black hole into which millions of dollars disappeared and reappeared on a quarterly basis. And every single reconciliation with Bluefinch Freight required the direct manual sign-off of one person, Camille Hawthorne. My direct superior was a man named Martin Cole, a vice president of operations, who had been with my father since the beginning. Martin was a creature of comfort and routine, a man whose professional ambition had peaked a decade ago and who now coasted on a gentle tide of mediocrity. His office was filled with pictures of his sailboat and a collection of nautical-themed paperweights. He was, I had always believed, a harmless company man. I found him staring blankly at a shipping manifest, a styrofoam cup of coffee steaming by his elbow. I closed his office door. "Martin, I need to talk to you about the Blue Finch account." He didn't look up from the paper, but a muscle in his jaw twitched. "What about it?" "The payments are cyclical and don't correspond to any actual freight services rendered. The contingency fund they're drawn from is artificially deflating our quarterly profits. It's a major red flag." I laid it out clinically, the way I would in a report. Martin finally looked at me. His eyes, normally a placid blue, were clouded with something I hadn't seen before: fear. He picked up a brass anchor and began to polish it with his thumb. "Avery," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "some things are above our pay grade. You're a good analyst. Too good. Maybe don't go digging where you're not wanted." "This isn't digging, Martin. This is my job. It's a multi-million-dollar discrepancy." "It's Camille's project," he said, finally meeting my gaze. His eyes pleaded with me. "It's a strategic financial instrument. That's all we need to know. Drop it. For your own good. Camille, she doesn't like questions." I left his office with a cold certainty solidifying in my gut. Martin wasn't just scared. He was complicit. He was the first layer of the firewall she had built around her scheme. Official channels were my next, and perhaps most foolish. Stop. I spent the rest of the afternoon drafting a formal risk alert memorandum. I was meticulous. I stripped all emotion and speculation from the document, focusing only on the data, the dates, the amounts, the lack of supporting documentation for Blue Finch freight, the statistical improbability of the fund's fluctuations. I cited the relevant sections of the company's own financial ethics policy. I attached the quarterly balance sheets with the numbers highlighted. It was a sterile, professional, undeniable piece of work. I submitted it through the company's internal compliance portal, a system designed to ensure anonymity and prompt review. I flagged it as high priority, routed to the head of the audit committee and the chief legal officer. For 2 days, there was nothing. The portal simply showed the status of my submission as pending review. Then, on the third morning, the status changed. Viewed, that was it. No response, no request for a meeting, no follow-up questions, just the cold, digital confirmation that my warning had been seen and utterly ignored. The real response came later that day, not from compliance, but from human resources. It was an email with the subject line, "A note on corporate culture." It was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive corporate speak, reminding all employees of the importance of maintaining a positive tone in all internal communications and fostering a culture of respect and trust. It spoke of the need to assume best intentions and to frame concerns as collaborative inquiries rather than disruptive critiques. Attached was a PDF of the company's Respect in the Workplace policy. It wasn't addressed to me directly, but it was sent to the entire risk analysis department. The message was clear. I had been disruptive. I was to be silent. The next day, the walls began to close in. Literally. I went to grab a coffee from the machine on the 14th floor, the finance department's floor, and my keycard was rejected at the security door. A small, insistent beep, a flash of red light. I tried again. Same result. The security guard at the lobby desk confirmed it when I went down to ask. "Sorry, Ms. Vale," he said, not looking up from his monitor. "Your access has been updated. 12th floor and below only." I was in the elevator, riding back up to my newly defined territory, when the doors opened on the 10th floor and she walked in. Camille. She looked radiant, dressed in a sharp navy blue power suit, her hair perfect, her smile dazzling. The elevator was empty except for the two of us. The doors closed, encasing us in a small, mirrored box. She turned to me, her smile softening into a look of concern. Her eyes drifted down to my wrist, where the faint, fading bruises from her grip in the kitchen were still visible. I had started wearing a thin leather bracelet to cover them. "Feeling better, Avery?" she asked, her voice like honey. "That was quite a fall you took." The air crackled with the unspoken truth. She wasn't asking about the barbecue. She was asking if I had learned my lesson. This was a test, a threat delivered with a smile. I looked at her, my reflection a pale, determined ghost beside her vibrant image in the polished steel doors. I met her gaze and held it. The fear was a cold stone in my stomach, but my voice, when it came out, was steady. "I'm fine, Camille," I said, a small, knowing smile touching my own lips. "And I'm learning something new." "Oh?" she asked, one perfectly sculpted eyebrow raised in amusement. "And what's that?" "I'm learning," I said, as the elevator dinged for my floor, "that numbers can talk, too." The doors slid open. I held her gaze for one more second, letting my words hang in the air between us. I saw a flicker of something in her eyes. Not fear, not yet, but a sliver of cold, hard appraisal. She was reassessing me. She was realizing I was not just a clumsy girl who tripped in the garage. I stepped out of the elevator without looking back. The doors closed, taking her down to her kingdom of fraudulent numbers and doctored reports. But she was wrong. They weren't her numbers anymore. They were mine, and I was just beginning to make them speak my language. My body became the first exhibit, twice a day, once in the stark, unforgiving light of morning and again under the yellow tungsten bulb of my bathroom at night. I performed a ritual. The flash of my phone's camera was a sterile, clinical light against my skin. I wasn't documenting pain. I was cataloging evidence, the deep purple bloom on my ribs where I'd hit the stool, the angry yellowing edges of the bruise on my cheekbone, the faint, finger-shaped marks on my wrist. Each photo was time-stamped, numbered, and saved to a 256-bit AES encrypted external hard drive. I labeled the folder Recipes. It was a small, bitter piece of irony that belonged only to me. My body was a ledger of her violence, and I was keeping meticulous records. The second piece of equipment was more proactive. I spent an evening researching Maine's surveillance laws. It was a one-party consent state, meaning I could legally record any conversation I was a part of. But that felt sloppy, open to legal challenges. Camille was too smart for that. Instead, I found a different solution. Our corporate policy stated that all meetings held in official conference rooms were subject to recording for minute-taking and archival purposes. A fact stated on a small, universally ignored plaque by every conference room door. This was my loophole. I purchased a micro-recorder, no bigger than a shirt button, with a high-fidelity microphone. It wasn't for clandestine hallway whispers. It was for the meetings she would inevitably call. For the conversations held in rooms where the expectation of privacy had already been legally waived. I was going to use her corporate structure against her. The device, when it arrived in a discreet brown package, felt cold and heavy in my palm, a small, dense piece of the future. While my body healed, my mind went to war. The front line was my workstation. I worked late, fueled by coffee and a cold. Simmering rage. I wrote a simple Python script, a silent bloodhound I could set loose in the company's financial data. Its task was to analyze payment cycles, to cross-reference invoice numbers with shipping manifests, and to flag anomalies in vendor payment schedules. I aimed it directly at the transactions between Hawthorne and Vail, Bluefinch Freight, and 3 other satellite suppliers I suspected were part of the same network. The script ran for 2 hours, a quiet progress bar inching across my screen. The results were cleaner and more damning than I could have hoped. It wasn't just that Bluefinch was a ghost. It was how the ghost operated. Dozens of legitimate, smaller invoices from the 3 satellite suppliers, for things like pallet rentals and short-haul trucking, were systematically held, left unpaid until the last 72 hours of the fiscal quarter. Then, they were bundled together and paid out in a single lump sum to Bluefinch Freight, which acted as a clearinghouse. This consolidated payment was then classified under the contractual loss contingency, artificially depressing the earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. The EBITDA. It was a brilliant piece of accounting fraud, designed to create a slush fund that could be used to manipulate quarterly results, all while looking like a prudent, if complex, vendor management strategy. The numbers didn't just talk, they screamed. My only real friend at the company was June Park, a network security specialist in the IT department. She was a quiet genius who viewed the corporate network as her personal kingdom, its data flows and access logs as a living, breathing thing. We had a standing coffee appointment every Wednesday, a ritual of shared complaints about bad management and terrible coffee. This Wednesday, she wasn't her usual sarcastic self. She guided me to a corner of the break room, away from the coffee machine. "Free," she said, her voice low, her eyes scanning the room. "Someone's been poking at your access privileges, an admin-level account, logged in after hours last night. They ran a query on your file access history for the last month." A chill went through me that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. "Camille?" June gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. The query was masked, but it originated from a terminal on the 14th floor. Right now, it's just a query, but the next step is a lockout, or a wipe. Whatever you have, you need to move it, now. You've probably got 24 hours, max. Panic, cold and sharp, tried to claw its way up my throat. I forced it down. This was just another variable, another risk to be managed. That evening, I didn't go home. I invoked the company's Bring Your Own Device, BYOD policy, which allowed employees to use personal devices for work and, crucially, to maintain local copies of their working files. It was a policy designed for convenience. I was using it as a life raft. I initiated a transfer of every file, every spreadsheet, every line of code I had written, and every result my script had generated. The data flowed from their server to my personal encrypted drive, a silent, digital exodus. As a final measure, I printed everything, the key spreadsheets showing the fund's fluctuations, the Blue Finch incorporation documents, the chain of command for payment approvals. It created a stack of paper 3 inches thick. The next morning, on my way to work, I stopped at a bank in the old Port District and placed the entire stack into a safe deposit box I had opened under my name. The cold, steel door sliding shut was one of the most satisfying sounds I had ever heard. My next stop was my family doctor, a kindly man who had treated my scraped knees since I was a child. I told him the story Camille had written for me. I had been clumsy. I said, "I tripped in the garage and hit my face on a workbench." He examined my bruises with a practiced, gentle touch. He asked few questions, his face a mask of professional sympathy. "It looks like some significant soft tissue trauma from the impact," he said, making notes in my file. "The bruising is consistent with a fall against a hard object." "Could I get a copy of my records for my files?" I asked, my voice steady. "Just for insurance purposes." He nodded, already instructing his receptionist to print a copy. As I left the office, the official medical record in my purse, I felt a grim satisfaction. The manila folder in his cabinet now held a professional, third-party corroboration of my injuries, dated and documented. It was another brick in the wall I was building. The final piece of the initial assembly was legal. I found a small, independent labor law attorney in an old brick building on a cobblestone street in Brackenport's historic market district. Her name was Eliza Vance, and her office smelled of old paper and freshly brewed tea. A world away from the glass and steel of Vale Tower, I told her I was there for a hypothetical consultation. I laid out the scenario of a mid-level analyst who discovers financial irregularities implicating a senior executive, who also happens to be a family member. I never used names. I spoke of a corporate culture that discourages internal reporting. She listened patiently, her fingers steepled, her expression giving nothing away. When I was finished, she spoke. "In a hypothetical situation like this," she said, her voice precise, The first step is always to follow the official internal whistleblower process, no matter how compromised you believe it to be. You file the report, you document the date, the time, and the recipients. You create a paper trail. The company's failure to act on that report then becomes a separate, actionable offense. It shifts from being about the initial crime to being about the cover-up. She explained the legal protections, the process, the risks. I paid her for the hour in cash, took her card, and left. I now had a strategy. When I got home that night, a large, ostentatious bouquet of white lilies was sitting on the kitchen counter. The sickly sweet fragrance filled the entire house. The card, written in Camille's perfect, looping script, was propped against the vase. "Thinking of you," it read. "Hoping you're feeling better. Family must trust each other. Love, Camille." It was a declaration of war disguised as a peace offering. It was a threat wrapped in sentiment. "Trust me," it said, or else. I picked up the card, the smooth, expensive cardstock cool against my fingers. I looked at the beautiful funereal flowers. A slow smile spread across my face, a real one this time. She was right. Trust was everything. I put my trust in the encrypted folder named Recipes. I put my trust in the data transfer logs time-stamped by June. I put my trust in the cold, steel door of a safe deposit box. I put my trust in a doctor's sterile report and a lawyer's pragmatic advice. I did believe in trust, but my trust was now placed in a verifiable chain of custody, in the cold, immutable truth of the evidence I was assembling. Piece by painful piece, the quarterly review was held in the main boardroom on the 20th floor, a room of glass and dark wood that overlooked the slate-gray waters of Brackenport Harbor. The air was chilled to a precise 68 degrees and smelled of strong coffee and corporate anxiety. At the head of the long mahogany table, Camille was a vision of command. She stood before a massive screen, clicking through a presentation titled Strategic Capital Optimization and Q3 Performance. The slides were masterpieces of design, all clean lines, bold graphics, and reassuring upward trends. She spoke in a language of fluid, confident jargon, leveraging assets, maximizing shareholder value, streamlining operational expenditures. My father, Graham Vale, sat to her right, watching her with an expression of deep, unwavering pride. He nodded along, his pen occasionally making a note on a leather-bound pad. He saw a brilliant CFO steering his company through challenging waters. He didn't see the sleight of hand, the numbers being moved under the shells of her perfectly crafted phrases. He didn't see the lie. I sat halfway down the table, between two vice presidents who were studiously examining their own notepads. My hands were clasped in my lap, my knuckles white. I waited for the right moment, a gap in her seamless narrative. It came when she paused on a slide summarizing vendor payouts. "The implementation of our new contingency protocols," she was saying, "has allowed us to create a more robust and predictable cash flow, mitigating contractual risks before they impact the bottom line." I unclasped my hands and placed them on the table. "Camille," I said. The name cut through the air-conditioned hush. All eyes turned to me. My father's expression shifted from pride to mild surprise. Camille's smile didn't falter, but her eyes hardened almost imperceptibly. "Yes, Avery?" "I have a question about the specifics of that contingency protocol," I said, keeping my voice level and professional. "Could you elaborate on the role of Bluefinch Freight in that process? They appear to be the primary recipient of these funds." A thick, uncomfortable silence descended on the room. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Martin Cole, my direct boss, shift in his seat. Camille's smile remained fixed. "Bluefinch Freight is a key strategic partner," she answered smoothly, her tone suggesting the question was elementary. "They handle consolidated disbursement and risk pooling for a number of our smaller logistics contractors. It's a highly efficient system. Of course, the specific terms of our arrangement are covered by a non-disclosure agreement." It was a perfect corporate answer. It was informative, dismissive, and built a wall of legal privilege around the truth. She was daring me to push further, to look unprofessional and naive in front of the entire executive team. Underneath the table, I felt a dull thud against my ankle. I glanced at Martin. He was staring at his notepad, but his face was pale. He coughed, a small, dry sound, and kicked me again. Harder this time. Stop. The message was clear. I looked back at the screen. Camille was already moving on, but the vendor payout summary was still visible. My eyes scanned the list of purchase order numbers, and then I saw it, a detail so small, so deeply buried in the data, that only someone who had spent the last week living inside these spreadsheets would notice. There were duplicate PO numbers, PO 81647A, PO 81647B, PO 81647C. They were all for different, smaller amounts, but they shared the same root number. It was a classic technique for circumventing the automatic flagging system for large, single-sum payments, splitting one large, fraudulent invoice into 3 smaller ones that would fly under the radar. My breath caught in my throat. It was the digital fingerprint of the crime, displayed for the entire room to see, yet completely invisible to them. And this commitment to efficiency, Camille said, clicking the remote, is reflected not only in our balance sheet, but in our values. The screen changed abruptly. A picture of smiling Hawthorne and Vail employees in bright blue t-shirts appeared, building a playground in a local park. Our corporate social responsibility program has never been stronger. She had changed the subject, masterfully pivoting from hard numbers to soft sentiment. The tension in the room dissipated, replaced by appreciative murmurs. My father beamed. I had been neutralized. I looked down at the table, the polished wood reflecting my own pale, determined face. The meeting continued for another hour, but I didn't hear a word. Back at my desk, the adrenaline from the meeting left me feeling hollow and shaky. The open plan office felt vast and exposed. Every conversation in the distance sounded like a whisper about me. My phone, which I had placed face down on my desk, buzzed. I picked it up. A message from an unknown number, just 5 words. Don't touch Blue Finch. The blood drained from my face. It wasn't a warning from Martin. This was something else. Someone else was watching. The conspiracy wasn't just a secret between Camille and her lapdog. It was a network. I deleted the message, my thumb trembling slightly. My chair suddenly felt very far from any exit. The confrontation I expected came the next day, not in an office, but in the calculated neutrality of the company cafeteria. I was picking at a salad at a small table in the corner, trying to be invisible. The clamor of trays, the drone of conversations, and the smell of overcooked chili usually provided a decent camouflage. But not today. A tray clattered onto the table opposite me. I looked up. It was Camille. She was alone. She sat down, arranging her own sad-looking salad and bottle of sparkling water with deliberate precision. She was dressed in a soft gray cashmere sweater, the picture of relaxed authority. "We need to talk," she said, her voice low enough to not carry to the surrounding tables. "I'm working," I said, pushing a piece of lettuce around my plate. "You embarrassed me yesterday." "Avery," she said, ignoring my comment. Her fork remained untouched. "More importantly, you embarrassed your father. You made it seem like there's dissent in our ranks. It was unprofessional." I asked a valid question about a multi-million-dollar line item. "You questioned my integrity in a room full of our top executives." She leaned forward slightly, her blue eyes sharp and cold. "We are a family. Do you understand what that means? It means we present a united front. It means we trust each other. It means we handle our disagreements in private." The word family was a mockery, a weapon she was trying to use against me. The memory of the garage, of the thud of the magazine against my skull, flashed in my mind. The rage I had been carefully packing down for days began to smolder. I put my fork down. "Family," I said, my voice quiet but clear, "doesn't beat each other in a garage." I watched the words land. For the first time since I had known her, her mask of perfect composure cracked. Her hand, which was reaching for her fork, froze midair. Her smile tightened at the corners. The faint, pleasant hum of the cafeteria seemed to fade away, leaving just the two of us in a pocket of charged silence. She held my gaze for a long, heavy moment. Then, slowly, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. It was a smile of pure, condescending confidence. It was the smile of a predator that knows it has already won. She finally picked up her fork. "You have no proof," she said softly, almost dismissively, before taking a delicate bite of her salad. I watched her. The perfect CFO, the perfect wife, the perfect liar. She was right. I had no proof that would stand up to her power, her influence, her position in my father's heart. I thought, not yet, but I will. The numbers on a screen could only tell me so much. They were a map of the crime, but they weren't the territory. Camille's confidence in the cafeteria, her casual dismissal, "You have no proof," echoed in my mind. She was right. Digital trails could be erased. Reports could be buried. I needed something physical, something solid and irrefutable. I needed to see the ghost. I needed to go to the place where Bluefinch freight existed, if it existed at all. My script had flagged the logistics data for the Bluefinch payments. Unlike our other vendors, their shipments weren't routed through our main distribution hub. They were exclusively processed through a smaller, older facility on the industrial outskirts of Brackenport, Warehouse 7. And the pattern was always the same. A truck would log in, a shipment would be processed, and the same truck would log out within the hour. Goods that arrive and depart in the same day aren't goods. They're a transaction. The alarm on my phone went off at 4:30 a.m. The sky outside my window was a deep, starless black. The world was asleep. But I felt a raw, electric alertness. This was my new reality. By 5:30, I was parked in the shadow of a derelict textile mill across the street from the entrance to the Hawthorne and Vale Industrial Park. Warehouse 7 was a large, windowless box of corrugated metal at the far end of the lot, isolated from the other, more active buildings. The only light came from a single, buzzing sodium lamp above a chain-link gate. I watched as a lone semi-truck, a plain white cab with an unmarked gray trailer, rumbled up to the gate. A night watchman, an older man with a paunch and a weary slump to his shoulders, emerged from a small guard shack. He checked a clipboard, nodded, and keyed a code into a panel. The gate slid open with a metallic groan. The truck rolled through and disappeared behind the warehouse. I checked the time. 5:47 a.m. I waited another 20 minutes before I drove my own car to the gate. The guard looked up from his crossword puzzle, annoyed at the interruption. I rolled down my window. "Avery Vale," I said, holding up my company ID. "I'm doing an early morning spot audit on receiving protocols." He squinted at the badge, then at my face. "Audit? At this hour? Nobody told me nothing about an audit." "That's the point of a spot audit," I said, trying to sound as bored and bureaucratic as possible. "I just need to see your inbound log for the last hour." He grumbled, but unlocked the shack and pushed a worn, leather-bound logbook across the counter. I scanned the page. There it was, a single entry. In, 5:47 a.m., Tractor 4B, Trailer 71G, Vendor, Bluefinch Freight. The guard had written something in the margins. I leaned closer to read the small, cramped script. Per C.H., email 0815, prioritize this route, no delays. C.H. Camille Hawthorne. My heart gave a hard, painful thump against my ribs. It was the first physical piece of evidence that tied her directly to the phantom. "Thanks," I said, sliding the book back to him. "That's all I need for now." He grunted and went back to his puzzle. I drove my car into the lot and parked near the employee entrance. Instead of going inside, I circled the building on foot. The air was cold and damp, carrying the smell of diesel and the nearby brackish river. Around back, in the loading bay, the white truck was parked. The trailer doors were closed. No one was around. The bay itself was empty except for a single, discarded wooden pallet leaning against the concrete wall. It looked out of place, a piece of forgotten stagecraft. I approached it cautiously. It was just a standard shipping pallet, splintered and stained, but something was off. A shipping label had been affixed to the central support block, but it had been aggressively scraped away. Most of it was gone, leaving a raw, gouged patch of wood. But a small corner remained, a stubborn remnant, and on that corner was a fraction of a QR code, a cryptic black and white checkerboard. Incomplete, but perhaps not useless. I took out my phone and photographed it from every angle, zooming in, hoping the pattern recognition software could extrapolate the missing data. Below the torn label was another mark, a long, deep scratch in the wood, as if a crowbar had been used to hastily pry something off. I took a picture of that, too. The scratch felt like a scar. It felt like a witness. My phone buzzed. The QR software had found a partial match, a fragment of a URL pointing to a public geolocation tag. It wasn't a Hawthorne and Vale facility. It was a commercial container yard 20 miles further inland, near the old railway lines. Just then, the loading bay door rolled up. A forklift operator emerged, saw me, and stopped, his expression a mixture of surprise and suspicion. "Can I help you, miss?" "Just stretching my legs," I said, forcing a casual smile. "Long drive." I turned and walked away, my heart pounding. I got back in my car just as the white truck's engine roared to life. It pulled out of the loading bay, the trailer still sealed, and headed back toward the gate. It hadn't unloaded anything. It hadn't loaded anything. It had simply been there. I followed it. I kept a safe distance, my sensible gray sedan melting into the sparse pre-dawn traffic. The truck didn't head for the highway or any major shipping routes. It took a series of back roads, rumbling past dormant farms and shuttered industrial parks. 25 minutes later, it turned into the container yard my phone had identified. It was a desolate place, a vast, gravel-covered field filled with hundreds of stacked shipping containers, rusting in the damp morning air. There was no office, no staff, just rows and rows of silent metal boxes. The truck pulled to a stop in a clear area near the back fence. A man in a dark hoodie got out of a beat-up pickup truck parked nearby. He didn't approach the driver's side of the cab. He went to a small document box mounted on the side of the trailer, took out a clipboard, and handed a new one to the driver through the window. The driver signed something, handed it back, and the man from the pickup walked away. That was it. The entire transaction. It took less than a minute. They were just swapping paper. The truck pulled out of the yard and headed back the way it came. I waited until it was out of sight, then got out of my car. I walked over to the spot where the truck had been. There was nothing there but tire tracks in the gravel. But I had seen the number stenciled on the back of the gray trailer, 71G. I took a picture of the container number nearest to the tracks, just in case. It was a long shot, but I needed every piece I could get. The drive back to the city was a blur. The sun was rising, casting a pale, watery light over the landscape. Back in my apartment, I didn't shower or change. I went straight to my laptop. I pulled up the internal freight logistics database and ran a search for trailer 71G. The system showed it was currently logged as being loaded with high-value electronics, en route from a supplier in Boston to our main hub for distribution. A real shipment. But that wasn't the trailer I had seen. The trailer I had seen was empty. They were using the ghost truck to create a fake paper trail that mirrored a real one, a phantom twin that allowed them to process the payments to Blue Finch. My hands were shaking. This was bigger than just financial fraud. This was a sophisticated criminal conspiracy happening inside my father's company. And if Martin Cole's fear was any indication, he was in on it. I opened the internal email server and ran a targeted search, cross-referencing Blue Finch Freight with senior management. It took 10 minutes for the search to yield a single, buried email from 6 months ago. A notification from the corporate legal services vendor confirming the registration of a new holding company. The company was named Kestrel Holdings, Inc. It was listed as the sole parent company of Blue Finch Freight. The incorporating director and sole signatory listed on the document was Martin Cole. The floor seemed to drop out from under me. It wasn't just Camille. Martin wasn't her victim. A man scared into silence. He was her lieutenant, Her enforcer, the harmless man with the sailboat pictures, was the one signing the documents, the one giving her scheme the veneer of legitimacy. I wasn't just up against my stepmother, I was up against a faction. I finally left my apartment in the late afternoon, my mind numb with the weight of it all. As I walked down the street to my car, I saw it from 100 feet away, a long, jagged line of silver against the dark blue paint of the driver's side door. Someone had dragged a key from the front fender all the way to the back, pressing hard, leaving a deep, vicious gouge in the metal. It was a crude message, a schoolyard threat. It wasn't Camille's style. It was clumsy, angry, and direct. It was Martin's style. My phone rang as I stood there, staring at the damage. The caller ID was blocked. I knew who it was. I answered, my voice a dead calm. "Hello, Camille." Her voice was smooth, with a slight, mocking edge of concern. "I heard you took a little road trip this morning. Avery, you're getting lost, wandering into places you don't belong." There was a pause. "Your father is under a lot of stress. The company needs stability right now. He can't handle any more trouble. Do you understand?" She was using him as a shield. She was using my love for my father as a weapon to force me into silence. I looked at the scratch on my car, a physical manifestation of their threats. I thought of the scratch on the pallet, a silent witness to their crime. I said nothing. "Avery, are you there?" I ended the call. I stood there for a long moment in the quiet street. Then I raised my phone, aimed the camera at the jagged wound in my car's paint, and took a picture. I went into my phone's settings, selected the image, and set it as my lock screen. Let her call back. Let them see what I saw every time I picked up my phone. It wasn't a picture of her. It wasn't a picture of them. It was a picture of their crime. A silent witness I would carry with me everywhere. The scratch on my car was a crude piece of punctuation, a violent end to one chapter and the beginning of another. It told me I was running out of time. They knew I was looking, and their response was escalating from veiled threats to petty vandalism. The next step would be something worse. I had been gathering shields, data, reports, photographs. Now, I needed a sword. The first piece of it was delivered by June Park in the humming, chilled air of a server room on the IT floor, a place where the only light came from the rhythmic blinking of 100 tiny LEDs. It smelled of burnt coffee and ozone. She didn't look at me as she spoke, her eyes fixed on a monitor displaying cascading lines of code. "He's getting sloppy," she said, her voice a low murmur against the drone of the cooling fans. She pointed a slender finger at a specific line on the screen. "That's Martin Cole's admin login. He accessed the primary accounting server at 2:17 a.m. last Tuesday. He was in the system for exactly 14 minutes. "Looking at my files?" I asked. "Worse," June said, finally turning to look at me, her expression grim. "He was changing the past. He ran a script to backdate the timestamp on the final approval for 3 of the Bluefinch wire transfers, the ones you asked him about. He made it look like they were approved a week earlier than they actually were." She tapped another key, and a comparison log appeared. Red text highlighted the original timestamps. Green showed the altered ones. He was covering his tracks, but he's not a network admin. He used a brute force script that left a huge, messy footprint in the server logs. He might as well have signed his name. She copied the logs to an encrypted USB drive and handed it to me. The small piece of plastic felt heavy, a concentrated dose of Martin's panic. "This is a federal offense, Avery," she said quietly. "This is wire fraud and obstruction. This isn't just about cooking the books anymore." The next piece of the sword was forged in fear, but it wasn't my own. I had identified the junior accountant who processed the final payments for Bluefinch. His name was Theo Marsh, a young man barely 2 years out of college, with a nervous energy and eyes that perpetually darted toward the exits. I caught him in the lobby as he was leaving for the day. I didn't threaten him. I didn't even raise my voice. I just asked him to tell me about the reconciliation process for the contingency fund. We sat in a sterile, anonymous coffee shop 2 blocks from the office. He stared into his cup of black coffee as if it held the answers to the universe. It wasn't right, he whispered, his voice so low I had to lean in to hear. The paperwork was always incomplete. Martin would just tell me to push it through. He'd say it was a time-sensitive special project for Camille. And you never questioned it? I asked gently. He finally looked at me, and I saw a profound, weary sadness in his eyes. I did. Once, I told him the supporting documents didn't match the invoice amounts. He swallowed hard. He told me that if I wanted to make it through my first performance review, I needed to learn how to be a team player. He said my quarterly KPI was tied to processing all vendor payments within a 24-hour window, and if I created a bottleneck, my bonus, and maybe my job, would be on the line. He looked down at his hands. I have student loans. My mom is sick. I couldn't afford to lose my job. He was a cog in their machine, a boy they had threatened into compliance. He was also a human witness. I told him I wouldn't use his name, not yet, but I needed an account of what happened. He agreed, a wave of what looked like relief washing over his face. Armed with June's server logs and Theo's story, I went back to the lawyer, Eliza Vance. I laid out the new evidence on her cluttered oak desk. She listened, her expression unreadable, and when I was done, she gave me the same calm, pragmatic advice as before. You have a strong case for a wrongful termination suit if they fire you, she said. But to expose the fraud, you still have to follow the process. It's the most powerful move you can make. You need to create a formal whistleblower report and submit it internally. Document everything. Give them a chance to do the right thing. They won't, I said. They'll bury it and fire me. I know, she said, a flicker of something like sympathy in her eyes. And their failure to act will be the cornerstone of our case with the SEC. You have to let them walk right into their own trap. So I began to write. For 3 days, I barely slept. I assembled everything into a single, comprehensive dossier. It was 42 pages long. It had an executive summary, a detailed financial analysis of the Blue Finch transactions, copies of the split purchase orders, the logs from Warehouse 7, and the photo of the scraped pallet. It had June's server logs showing Martin's after-hours data tampering and an anonymized but detailed statement from a junior member of the accounting department. At the very end, I included the photos of my bruises from the folder named Recipes and a copy of the doctor's report diagnosing soft tissue trauma consistent with a fall. I didn't explicitly link the two. I didn't have to. I let the juxtaposition speak for itself. I printed 2 copies. One went into my safe deposit box, joining the other hard copies. The second, I delivered by messenger to Eliza Vance's office. She would act as a third-party repository, officially time-stamping its receipt. The trap was now built and baited. That evening, my father called. His voice sounded thin and strained. Avery, let's have dinner, just the 2 of us, at the helm. It was our old spot, a quiet restaurant by the marina that we used to go to when I was a teenager, before my mother passed, before Camille. A sliver of hope, fragile and foolish, flickered within me. Maybe this was my chance. Maybe I could make him see. The hope died the moment I walked in. He was at a table by the window, and Camille was sitting beside him. She smiled brightly at me, a picture of familial warmth. I decided to tag along, she said. I hope you don't mind. My father looked tired. The skin under his eyes was puffy, and I noticed a slight, intermittent tremor in his right hand as he picked up his water glass. He saw me looking and quickly put it down. Camille placed her hand over his, a gesture of steadying comfort that looked more like an act of possession. She ordered for him, Graham will have the salmon, grilled, no sauce, and a sparkling water. He needs to watch his sodium. The meal was a nightmare of forced pleasantries. Camille steered the conversation, talking about market trends and new shipping regulations, subjects where she was the expert and I was the subordinate. My father was mostly silent, a ghost at his own table. I felt like I was watching him from a great distance, a man trapped behind a wall of glass. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I waited for Camille to pause for a breath. Dad, I said, my voice cutting through the polite chatter. I need to talk to you. Alone. I need 20 minutes of your time, with no interruptions and no corporate speak. Just you and me. Camille's smile froze. My father looked from me to her, a flicker of panic in his eyes. He cleared his throat. Avery, he said, his voice taking on a strained, formal tone. This is a lovely dinner. Let's not bring the office to the dinner table. And that was it. The wall of glass was still there. He couldn't see me, or he wouldn't. He was so terrified of conflict, so dependent on the sense of stability Camille projected, that he couldn't bear to look at the possibility that it was all a lie. He chose the comfortable fiction over the ugly truth. I understood then. Words wouldn't work. A private conversation was impossible. He wouldn't be convinced by his daughter in a restaurant. He would have to be confronted as a CEO, in a forum he couldn't escape, with evidence he couldn't dismiss. He would have to be shown the rot inside his own company in a language he couldn't ignore, the language of a crisis, presented on a screen in front of his board, his investors, and his entire company. The next morning, I found June in the break room. My face must have shown the despair I felt. The dinner didn't go well, I stated. It wasn't a question. He couldn't hear me, I said, my voice flat. June poured me a cup of coffee. Then you have to make him see, she said. She leaned against the counter, her expression thoughtful. The quarterly town hall meeting is next week. The whole company will be there, all the executives. And this year, for the first time, they're live streaming it for the international offices and key shareholders. She paused, looking at me intently. The presentation software the company uses, it has an autoplay feature for embedded media, a security flaw. Really, if a video or audio file is named with a specific syntax, risk addendum, for example, and it's placed in the shared presentation directory right before the meeting starts, the system will recognize it as a supplemental file for the risk management section. When the presenter gets to that slide in the deck, the file will launch automatically. It overrides the presenter's controls for the duration of the file. She let the words sink in. She was handing me the sword and telling me exactly where to strike. A public forum, a captive audience, a system designed for corporate presentations, repurposed as a Trojan horse. I looked at her, at my one true ally. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but for the first time, it was overshadowed by a sense of absolute, chilling certainty. I gave a single sharp nod. There was no turning back now. The conference hall on the 18th floor was a theater of corporate power. 300 employees sat in tiered rows of ergonomic chairs. A sea of faces turned toward a brightly lit stage. Banks of live stream cameras, small black eyes on slender tripods, were positioned discreetly along the walls, broadcasting this quarterly town hall to offices and investors around the world. The air was cool and still, scrubbed clean by an industrial HVAC system. I sat in the third row, an anonymous face in the crowd, my hands clasped so tightly in my lap that my knuckles ached. In my pocket, the small, cold shape of an encrypted USB drive felt like a detonator. Camille walked onto the stage to a polite, sustained round of applause. She was luminous under the spotlights, dressed in a sharp, cobalt blue dress that projected confidence and authority. She smiled, a warm, encompassing expression that reached the farthest corners of the room. The presentation began. "Good morning, everyone," she said, her voice resonant and clear through the state-of-the-art sound system. "I want to start today by talking about two of our core values, transparency and safety." The words hung in the air, a monument to her hypocrisy. She spoke of financial transparency, of open communication, of building trust with their shareholders. She spoke of employee safety, of their commitment to a secure and respectful workplace where every individual felt valued. She was brilliant. She was seamless. She was a lie, beautifully told. I watched my father, who sat in the front row with the other board members. He was rapt, his gaze fixed on his wife, a proud, gentle smile on his face. He was drinking the poison and calling it wine. The presentation moved through its agenda: sales projections, market expansion, operational efficiencies. Finally, the slide I had been waiting for appeared on the massive screen behind her. It was a simple, text-heavy slide titled, Q4 Risk Management and Mitigation. This was my moment. Camille was about to speak when I stood up. "Excuse me, Camille?" My voice, amplified slightly by the room's acoustics, was not loud, but it was sharp enough to cut through the corporate reverence. A ripple of murmurs went through the audience. Heads turned, cameras swiveled. Camille's smile tightened by a millimeter. "Avery, do you have a question?" "I have a 5-minute supplemental report to add to the risk management section," I said, my voice as steady as I could make it. "It contains urgent, time-sensitive information that directly impacts the integrity of this company's financials." In the front row, Martin Cole shot to his feet. "This is out of order," he snapped, his face flushing a blotchy red. "That's not on the agenda. We have a schedule to keep." "I'm sure we can spare 5 minutes for our top risk analyst," Camille said, her voice dangerously smooth. She was playing the part of the gracious leader, confident that she could swat me down. She was underestimating me. She was underestimating June. "Go ahead. Avery, what is it you'd like to share?" It was the opening June needed. In the AV booth at the back of the room, a single command was entered. The main screen behind Camille flickered, and her risk management slide was replaced by something else. It was my presentation, Risk Addendum. The first slide was a stark, simple flowchart. At the top, a box labeled Hawthorne and Vale. An arrow pointed down to a box labeled Bluefinch Freight. A second arrow pointed from there to a third box, Kestrel Holdings, Inc., and a final, damning arrow pointed from Kestrel back to a name, Director, Martin Cole. A collective gasp went through the room. It was the entire criminal conspiracy, laid bare in the sterile language of a PowerPoint slide. Camille stared at the screen for a heart-stopping second, the blood draining from her face, but she recovered in an instant. She laughed, a light, dismissive sound. "My apologies, everyone," she said, turning to the audience with a charming, self-deprecating smile. "It seems we're having a technical glitch. Someone must have loaded the wrong file. We'll get that sorted out." She nodded to the AV booth. "Cut that, please." But I still had control. "This is not a glitch," I said, my voice ringing with a new authority. "And this is not the only file." I clicked the small remote in my hand. The flowchart vanished. In its place, a black screen appeared. White text loaded. Now playing. Garage, move. I saw a flash of pure, undiluted panic in Camille's eyes. This she had not expected. The sound that filled the auditorium was not a clean, recorded voice. It was ambient audio, filled with the gentle, background chirping of crickets on a summer night. It was the recording from my neighbor's security camera, the one that overlooked our backyard. For a few seconds, the audience heard only the crickets and the distant, muffled sound of laughter from the barbecue. They were confused, unsettled. And then it came, a woman's sharp, piercing cry, quickly muffled. It was followed by a dull, percussive thud, and then a man's voice, my father's, calling out from a distance, "Everything okay in here?" As his voice faded, the first image appeared on the screen. It was one of the photos from my recipes folder, a close-up of my face, the cheekbones swollen and bruised, my lips split and bloody. The photo was clinically lit, time-stamped, undeniable. The room fell into a silence so profound, it felt like a physical pressure. 300 people held their breath as one. The image on the screen changed. A photo of the deep purple bruise on my ribs, then another, of the finger-shaped marks on my wrist. The audio of the crickets continued to play, a chilling, pastoral soundtrack to the brutal images on the screen. Finally, a scanned document appeared. The report from my doctor. The diagnosis clearly visible. Significant soft tissue trauma consistent with a fall against a hard object. The audio track ended. The last photo, of my bruised face remained on the screen, a silent, 30-foot-tall accusation. The silence in the room stretched for 5, 10, 15 seconds. It was absolute. I raised the microphone I had taken from a nearby stand. I looked out, not at the audience, but directly at the board of directors in the front row, at my father. On August 28th, I began, my voice clear and cold, devoid of emotion. I filed a formal, 42-page whistleblower report through the company's internal compliance channels, detailing evidence of systemic wire fraud. That report was viewed, and then ignored. I paused, letting the words sink in. The presentation you just saw is an addendum to that report. The first file was the evidence of the professional crime. The second was the evidence of the violence used to conceal it. The spell was broken. Chaos erupted. Camille, her face a mask of pure fury, strode to the edge of the stage. "Cut the feed!" she shrieked, her voice raw, all pretense of control gone. "Cut the live stream now!" But it was too late. As June had explained, the feed wasn't just live. It was being cached and rebroadcast through a dozen different servers for the global shareholders. Cutting the source now would do nothing. The evidence was out. It was everywhere. In the front row, past the shocked faces of the other executives, past Martin Cole, who looked like he was about to vomit, I saw my father. He pushed his chair back with a loud scrape that no one heard over the din. He got to his feet, slowly, unsteadily, as if his legs could barely support him. He wasn't looking at Camille on the stage. He wasn't looking at the board members beside him. He was looking at me, and for the first time in a very, very long time, I could tell that he was actually seeing me. The chaos that followed the image of my bruised face was a wave of pure noise, gasps, angry murmurs, the frantic rustling of 300 people turning to whisper to their neighbors. On stage, Camille was still screaming at the AV booth, her composure shattered, her face a livid mask of rage. Martin Cole looked like a man who had just witnessed his own execution, but in the front row. My father remained standing, a statue in a hurricane, his eyes locked on mine. The noise was a shield for them, a chaos they could hide behind. I had to cut through it. I walked from my seat, down the aisle, and stepped up onto the low stage. I ignored Camille. I ignored Martin. I walked to the lectern, adjusted the microphone, and tapped it once. The soft thump-thump echoed through the sound system, a quiet heartbeat that momentarily silenced the room. "The evidence is not just visual," I said, my voice calm and amplified, a blade of cold steel slicing through the hot, panicked air. The room settled, the whispers dying down. All eyes were on me. "June," I said, looking toward the back of the room, "please bring up the next file. Invoice chain, PDF." The picture of my face vanished from the screen, replaced by a dry, damning spreadsheet. The noise in the room changed from shock to a low, intense hum of dawning comprehension. This was a language they all understood. "What you are looking at," I said, my voice resonating with the cold authority of a federal prosecutor, "is the chain of invoices for the last 2 quarters related to the Bluefinch freight account." I used a laser pointer from the lectern, its red dot a tiny, precise weapon. "Please note the purchase order numbers. You will see a repeating pattern. PO 81647A, B and C, PO 899992A, B and C. These are single, large payments split into 3 smaller, sublimit invoices. This is a common technique used to bypass the automated financial controls that would have flagged a single, multi-million-dollar payment to a shell corporation." The red dot moved. "Now, please direct your attention to the accompanying email, Martin Cole Directive, EML." An email appeared on screen, its text stark and clear. It was from Martin to Theo Marsh in accounting. The subject line read, "Urgent Q3 processing." The body was short. "Theo, please ensure the attached are processed before EOD to be booked for the quarter. CH needs this finalized for the board report." "This is an email from VP Martin Cole," I stated, directing a junior accountant to process the fraudulent, split invoices, explicitly stating it is on the authority of CFO Camille Hawthorne. Martin, who had been shrinking in his chair, now looked like a cornered animal. That's taken out of context. That's standard operational procedure," he stammered, but his voice was weak, drowned out by the evidence on the screen. "Is it also standard operational procedure to alter federal financial records after the fact?" I asked, my voice dropping. "June, please display the server logs. Admin log M. Cole. Text." The email was replaced by lines of green and red code. "These are the admin server logs from last Tuesday at 2:17 a.m. They show Martin Cole's account accessing the accounting server and running a script to backdate the approval timestamps on these exact invoices. The action was taken one day after I first questioned him about the Blue Finch account. This is not financial strategy. This is evidence tampering and obstruction." A heavy, thick silence filled the room. The board members were staring at the screen, their faces grim. They understood the legal ramifications of what they were seeing. This was no longer an internal squabble. This was a crime. "I know that some of you may think this is just a matter of aggressive accounting," I continued, looking at the faces in the audience. "That perhaps a junior employee was simply pressured by a superior. To that point, I would like to invite that employee to speak." I turned my gaze toward the back of the room. "Theo Marsh?" For a moment, there was no movement. Then, a slim, terrified-looking young man stood up from his seat in the back row. He looked pale, but as he started to walk down the aisle, his steps became more steady. A path cleared for him as if by magic. He walked up the side stairs to the stage and came to stand beside me at the lectern. He was trembling, but he looked directly at the board of directors. "My name is Theo Marsh," he said, his voice shaking but clear in the microphone. "When I received the Blue Finch invoices, I flagged them because they had no supporting documentation. I went to Mr. Cole. I told him I couldn't process them." He took a deep, shuddering breath. "He told me that I was not a team player. He said that if I wanted to have a future at this company, I needed to learn who was in charge. He threatened my job. He said he would make sure my first performance review was my last if I didn't sign the payment authorizations, so I signed them." He looked at me, then back at the board. I was scared, and I'm sorry. He stepped back from the microphone. His part played. He was no longer a cog. He was a witness. Camille, who had been standing at the side of the stage, stunned into silence, finally found her voice. She strode forward, her face a mask of righteous indignation. "This is a circus," she declared, her voice ringing with its old power. "A disgruntled employee and a vindictive girl twisting standard financial practices into a conspiracy. Yes, we used aggressive strategies. Yes, we managed our earnings to project stability. We did it for the good of this company, to protect its stock price, to protect your jobs, to ensure its survival in a volatile market." She was trying to reframe the narrative, to turn the crime into a heroic act of corporate stewardship. I turned to face her. The entire room, the entire world, seemed to shrink until it was just the two of us on that stage. "There is no corporate goal," I said, my voice low and lethal. "That justifies violence and fraud." The two words hung in the air, inextricably linked. And then, a new voice cut through the tension. It was my father. He was still on his feet, his face ashen. He wasn't looking at the board, or the screens, or the audience. He was looking only at his wife. He asked a single question, his voice raw with a pain so deep it seemed to tear the air apart. "Camille," he asked, his voice cracking, "did you hit my daughter?" The entire room held its breath. The question was not about money. It was not about stock prices or EBITDA. It was about a father and a daughter and a crime committed in the dark of a garage. It was the only question that mattered. Camille stared at him, her mouth opening and closing silently for a moment. Every ounce of her corporate training, her poise, her cunning, was screaming at her to deny it, to lie, to create another fiction, but the raw animal fury that lived beneath her polished surface, the same fury I had seen in the garage, finally broke through, her face twisted into a sneer of pure, arrogant contempt. She was silent for 3 long, agonizing seconds, and then she spoke the words that ended her life as she knew it. She needed to be taught a lesson, she spat, her voice dripping with venom. A sound like a single, sharp intake of 1,000 breaths swept through the auditorium. It was the sound of a verdict being delivered. Her admission, so callous and unrepentant, was more damning than any spreadsheet or server log. It was a confession, not just to the act, but to the malice behind it. In that perfect, horrified silence, I stepped forward. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a folded document. "This is a formal letter from my legal counsel," I announced, my voice ringing with finality. "It outlines the evidence presented here today and formally requests, on behalf of myself and other concerned employees, that the board of directors take immediate action. We demand an independent, external investigation into the company's financial practices, and we demand the immediate and indefinite suspension, pending the outcome of that investigation, of Chief Financial Officer Camille Hawthorne and Vice President of Operations Martin Cole." I placed the letter on the lectern. The chairman of the board, a stoic man named Arthur Kensington, stood up. He looked at Camille with an expression of profound disgust. He looked at Martin, who seemed to have collapsed in on himself. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of respect in his eyes. "A motion has been put before the board," he said, his voice booming with authority. "All in favor of launching an immediate, full-scale independent investigation and suspending Ms. Hawthorne and Mr. Cole, effective immediately, please signify by saying aye." "Aye," said a woman to his left. "Aye," said another. "Aye. Aye. Aye." 6 voices, clear and decisive. "All opposed?" A single weak voice from the end of the row. A man I knew to be one of Camille's staunchest allies mumbled, "Nay." "The motion carries, 6-1, Arthur declared. "It's done." I looked at Camille. Her face was a ruin, the mask of power and control utterly destroyed, leaving only the ugly, twisted features of a bully who had finally been defeated. I reached out, picked up the microphone from its stand, and set it down gently on the lectern with a soft, final thud. My hands weren't shaking anymore. The chaos within the conference hall was a distant, roaring sea. Here, in the hushed, carpeted corridor outside, the air was thick and still, heavy with the aftermath. The board had remained inside to begin the formal process of what would become a corporate decapitation. The employees, when they were finally dismissed, filed out in stunned silence, their faces a mixture of shock, fear, and a strange, furtive gratitude. They parted around me as if I were a rock in a stream, their eyes avoiding mine, but filled with a new, startling respect. I didn't move. I leaned against the cool, marble-clad wall opposite the boardroom doors and waited. He came out a few minutes later, the last one to leave before the doors were closed by a grim-faced security chief. My father looked like a man who had aged 20 years in 20 minutes. His tie was loosened. His usually immaculate gray hair was in disarray where he had run his hands through it, and his face was a pale, slack mask of devastation. He didn't seem to see the corridor or the few remaining stragglers. He just saw me. He walked toward me, his steps unsteady, and came to a stop a few feet away. He leaned his shoulder against the wall, mirroring my posture, a broken reflection. For a long moment, he said nothing. He just stared at the polished floor, at the intricate patterns in the expensive carpet. The only sound was the faint, ever-present hum of the building's ventilation system. "I'm sorry," he finally whispered, his voice a dry, rasping sound. The words seemed to cost him a terrible effort. He looked up, and his eyes were filled with a profound, soul-deep shame. "I'm so sorry. Avery, I didn't see it. I didn't want to see it." The apology I had once craved, the acknowledgement I had desperately needed. now felt like a foreign currency in a land I no longer inhabited. The wound was too deep for a simple apology to heal. It wasn't about my feelings anymore. It had become about something larger. "I don't need you to be sorry, Dad," I said, my voice quiet but firm, devoid of the anger that had fueled me for months. All that was left was a vast, cold clarity. "I need this company to be clean." His face crumpled slightly, as if my words were a physical blow. He understood. I wasn't his little girl seeking comfort. I was a stakeholder demanding accountability. The boardroom doors opened again. This time, it was 2 uniformed security guards. Between them, walking with a stiff, furious dignity, was Camille. Martin Cole trailed behind her, his head bowed, his face the color of wet cement. He looked utterly defeated, a man hollowed out from the inside. One of the guards was holding their 2 corporate ID badges, the plastic cards swinging gently from a lanyard. Camille stopped when she saw us. Her face, which had been a mask of cold fury, twisted into a venomous sneer. The raw hatred in her eyes was startling in its intensity. She ignored my father completely. Her gaze was fixed solely on me. "You did this," she hissed, her voice low and sharp. "You destroyed our family." I pushed myself off the wall and took a step toward her, closing the distance until we were only a few feet apart. I could smell her expensive perfume, the same scent that had filled the garage that night. "A family," I said, my voice as cold and hard as the marble on the walls, "is not built on fake invoices and fear." Her face contorted, but she had no response. The truth was a gag in her mouth. The guard beside her gently touched her elbow, a silent command to move on. She allowed herself to be led away, but as she walked toward the elevator bank, she looked back over her shoulder one last time. It was not a look of defeat. It was a promise of future hatred. The elevator doors chimed open. Camille and Martin stepped inside, flanked by the guards. The polished steel doors began to slide shut, a silver curtain falling on the final act of their careers at Hawthorne and Vale. For a brief second before they closed completely, I saw my own reflection, a pale, composed face, a stranger's face, almost, and there, just visible under the concealer, a faint, yellowish-purple shadow on my cheekbone, the last fading ghost of her violence. The doors closed with a soft, definitive whoosh. They were gone. My father let out a long, shuddering breath, the sound of a man who had been holding it for years. He looked at me, his eyes full of 1,000 unasked questions, but he settled on the most immediate one. Are you going to press criminal charges for what she did?" It was the first time he had fully acknowledged the assault, the first time he had called it something other than a fall or an accident. It was a significant concession, a crack in the wall of his denial. I considered the question. I thought of the police reports, the court dates, the media spectacle. I thought of what I had set out to do. My goal was never to put her in a cage. It was to tear down the corrupt kingdom she had built. "I'm letting the board and the authorities do their part now," I replied. "The SEC will handle the fraud. The independent investigators will handle the rest. My part in this ended when the truth came out." He nodded slowly, seeming to understand. I had fought the war on my terms. In my arena, I had won. What came next was for the lawyers and the accountants. A soft footstep behind me made me turn. It was June. She walked up to me, a small, proud smile on her face. In her hand, she held a single, black USB drive. It was identical to the one in my pocket. She held it out to me. "You won't need this anymore," she said. It was a blank drive, a decoy. The real files had been uploaded directly to the presentation server from her encrypted terminal. It was a beautiful, symbolic gesture. The weapon was no longer needed. The war was over. I took the empty drive from her. "Thank you, June," I said. The words felt inadequate for what she had done, for the risk she had taken, for everything. She just nodded, her eyes shining. "Any time." I slipped the blank USB into my pocket. It clicked against the one that held the original files. I made a mental note to destroy it. As I did, a strange sensation washed over me, a feeling of lightness, the crushing weight that I had been carrying on my shoulders for months, the constant tension, the fear, the rage. It was lifting, it was draining away, leaving behind a quiet, bone-deep exhaustion, but also a profound sense of peace. My phone vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out, a text message from an unsaved number. "Thank you for everything. I will testify. I'll tell them everything. Theo Marsh." A small, genuine smile touched my lips, for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. I had not just saved myself, I had given a voice to someone who had been silenced. I looked up. My father was still watching me, his expression complex, a mix of awe, fear, and a dawning, painful respect. I turned my gaze away from him, toward the vast wall of glass that overlooked the city of Brackenport. Etched into the glass in elegant silver letters was the company logo, Hawthorne and Vale. Under the bright, recessed lighting of the corridor, the logo seemed to glow. The letters were crisp and clean, as if a layer of dust and grime that I hadn't even noticed before had been meticulously wiped away, leaving behind something pure and bright and full of promise. The name Hawthorne was now a scar, a reminder of the sickness that had almost destroyed the company, but the name Vale was still there, my name, and for the first time, it felt like it truly belonged to me. A week later, the same conference hall on the 18th floor was filled again. This time, the mood was not one of corporate celebration, but of solemn, fragile hope. My father stood at the same lectern where I had exposed the rot, but he looked like a different man. The manufactured confidence was gone, replaced by a heavy, humbling gravitas. It wasn't a town hall, it was a reckoning. He announced the immediate formation of an independent oversight committee, to be staffed by external auditors with no prior connection to the company. He detailed a new, robust, and truly anonymous whistleblower policy, with direct reporting lines to this new committee, bypassing the internal chain of command entirely. He outlined the legal actions being taken, the cooperation with federal investigators, the clawback provisions being enacted on executive bonuses. Then, he stopped speaking as a CEO. His voice dropped, losing its practiced, public cadence, becoming the voice of a man addressing his people with a truth he could no longer evade. "For years," he said, his voice thick with an emotion I had never heard from him before, "I have spoken about this company as a family, but I failed to see that a sickness had taken root within my own house. I valued stability over truth. I saw what I wanted to see, for that failure of vision, and for the toxic culture of fear that it allowed to grow. I am profoundly sorry." He looked out at the 300 employees, his eyes moving from face to face. "I ask not for your trust, but for a chance to earn it back." I watched him from the back of the room, standing by the door. I felt a pang of something distant and complex. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the first faint stirring of understanding. He was a flawed man who had been willfully blind, but now, his eyes were open. It was a start. The company offered me a promotion. They wanted to make me an interim vice president, a public symbol of the new order. The title was a reward, a piece of corporate currency meant to signify my victory. I turned it down. The next morning, I submitted a formal application for a lateral transfer. I asked to be moved to the internal audit department, a quiet, unglamorous corner of the company dedicated to the meticulous, thankless task of checking the work of others. My fight had never been about climbing the ladder. It was about making sure the ladder was built on a solid foundation. The old regime vanished with the quiet, digital efficiency of a modern corporation. An email from the board announced that Camille Hawthorne had tendered her resignation, effective immediately. Her name was scrubbed from the executive leadership page on the company website. Martin Cole simply ceased to exist. One morning his name was on the company directory. The next, it was gone. His Slack account was deactivated. His email address now bounced back with a sterile, automated reply. They had become ghosts, erased from the institution they had sought to control. Later that afternoon, I left the office and walked out into the vast, open expanse of the employee parking lot. The midday sun was bright and hot, beating down on the endless blacktop. It was the same lot I had stumbled through in a daze after my disastrous dinner with my father. The same lot where I had discovered the angry, violent scratch on my car door. I found the spot where my car had been parked that day. The white painted lines on the asphalt were faded and cracked, scorched by the sun. I stood there for a long moment, remembering the person I had been then, trembling, terrified, isolated. The memory felt like a story about someone else. My phone vibrated in my pocket, a text from a number I didn't recognize. I opened it. The message was simple. Avery, thank you for saving the company. A friend from the logistics floor. I stared at the words, a slow, quiet warmth spreading through my chest. I hadn't just been fighting for myself. I hadn't realized how many others were watching, hoping, living under the same quiet shadow of fear. I thought of my father, alone in his office on the 20th floor, trying to piece together the company he had built and almost lost. I opened a new message and typed a short reply to him, the only one that mattered. I'm okay. A breeze, cool and clean, blew in from the direction of the lake. For a moment, it carried the faint, phantom sense of the Maine woods, pine needles and damp earth, and under it, I could almost smell the ghost of barbecue smoke. It wasn't a threat anymore. It was just a memory, a chapter in a book that was now closed and put away on a high shelf. I looked down at my hands. I instinctively touched my right wrist, the spot Camille had gripped with such bruising force in the kitchen what felt like a lifetime ago. My fingers traced the smooth, unmarked skin. The bracelet I had worn to cover the bruises was long gone. There was no bandage, no discoloration, no pain. There was nothing left but my own skin. A single, final thought rose in my mind, as clear and sharp as a bell ringing in the quiet afternoon air. My silence is over. Thank you so much for listening to the story. It means the world to me. I'd love to connect with all of you. So please drop a comment below and let me know where in the world you're listening from. If you enjoyed this, please consider subscribing to the channel and giving this video a like. And if you really want to support what I do, please hit that hype button to help this story get heard by even more people. Your support makes all of this possible.